of Stay, Work, Play New Hampshire. So this is our first event of the Life of the Party series, and we're thrilled that you could all join us. We weren't expecting quite this full a house, so hope you're all comfortable for the next about 45 minutes. So the idea behind this series, it's a partnership between Stay, Work, Play and the New Hampshire Institute of Politics to bring a different discussion to political conversations. So we want to offer you the chance today to get to know Senator Rubio, to find out what he is like as a person and what his political policies and ideas are. So we have a number of questions, but as Mike will explain, we really want to have you engaged throughout the course of the morning. So we also want to thank Bank of America. We wouldn't be here today without them, so thank you very much, Bank of America, for your sponsorship for today. Also, if you're on social media, we do have a hashtag, so it's Life of the Party NH. So certainly if you're taking pictures, asking questions, putting comments out there, be sure to use that hashtag. So without further ado, we would like to invite Senator Rubio to join us.
Senator, thank you so much for being here. What we thought we would do first quickly is just have everyone, our moderator, go around, introduce themselves, and we'll get right into it. So you met Kate Lusko. She's the CEO of Stay, Work, Play. Drew, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Drew Klein. I was editorial page editor of the New Hampshire newspaper for twice as long as any millennial would ever keep a job. And now I'm out on my own as an independent writer and communications consultant.
And I'm Jessica Eschleman. Fundamentally, I'm a mom. Professionally, I raise money for cultural programming throughout New Hampshire at New Hampshire Humanities. And civically speaking, I serve on a variety of boards and just finished my term as chair of the Concord Young Professional Network.
And I'm Mike Skelton. I'm the president and CEO of the Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce, former board member of the Manchester Young Professional Network, now a board member of Stay, Work, Play, and also a proud alumni of St. Anselm College, which we're pleased to welcome you here today. So thank you for being here, Senator.
Thank you.
So as you can tell, we've got a full room. We've got a lot of young professionals, we've got students here, we've got community leaders, and we've prepared a number of questions that we want to talk to you about that are very different than I think than what you've been asked at other events and programs.
Or debates, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to get into, is this is going to be very different than all those debates you've been doing lately. By the way, our goal as moderators is to surpass the performance of some of those debate moderators that have been getting so much attention lately, so hopefully we can pull that off. But what I want to ask, so those crazy debates you're part of, how do you recover from those? What's your process after those? Are you hitting the gym? Is there family time? Because I can't imagine after one of those debates what you're feeling like and what it's like as a candidate.
Well, I mean, let's keep some perspective. You're basically standing in an air-conditioned room for 2 hours behind a microphone. There's harder jobs in the world than doing that. But I think the only thing about it is just like an adrenaline rush to being on the stage. And coming down from that takes a couple hours. Luckily, the last couple of debates have been out in a different time zone. So it's given us a couple extra hours. I mean, I think the last one ended at 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. Mountain Time. So, but I don't really do anything special for that. I usually have dinner in my room and try to get to sleep and wake up the next day. Usually the next day we wake up really early for a television hits or whatever. That's the downside of being out in those time zones. After the last debate, I think I woke up at 3:30 a.m. for the 4:15 hits or something. But that's really it. I mean, it's just you kind of get up and keep going the next day. You have something else to do. So I don't really have a routine to recover. It isn't that damaging. The CNN debate was long. That was 3 hours. I almost needed a whirlpool after that, but I was fine.
Well, it's I don't know how you guys do it, so congrats to you guys for
It's fun. I mean, it's a lot of fun, especially the first one when you got up there and you walked on that stage. My feeling was, I've been watching these things on TV for years, and now I'm actually in one. So that really the first one really kind of struck me that way. The other two obviously have been fine, but the first one is the one that really kind of impacted me. Just the idea that I've been watching these debates for all these years, and now I'm actually in one of these debates took a few minutes to get used to.
So fitting in with the theme for today, we had your playlist, we found your playlist on Spotify, so we were playing some music that you...
That's an old, when was that list from?
I'm not actually sure.
All right.
There's a YouTube in there. There's a whole bunch of stuff there. But so fitting in with this Life of the Party theme, if you were to host a party of, let's say, 40 of the top young professional leaders around the country, what would that party look like? What would you eat? Where would you have it? What
Hopefully in the White House. I mean, we're gonna. But one of the things that Obviously, I mean, I'm a fan of the early 90s West Coast hip-hop stuff. It's just hard to listen to that to kids and everybody else. It's not necessarily family-friendly material. And talented people, right, but not family-friendly. So there's a kind of a genre you're familiar with. When I mention this to other people in the press, they're not sure what I'm talking about. But electronic dance music's grown really fast. And the good thing about it is I can listen to it in front of my kids because there's no words. A lot of them don't have words, or they're using samples of other songs with it. And so I'd like to have some of that music. Maybe some of those guys or gals come in, like Tiesto or any of these other performers that are going on around the world, Calvin Harris or somebody like that. Something cool parties. I like that music.
What would you eat? What sort of food?
That's a great question. I like Tex-Mex. I've always liked it, so something along those lines.
So when you're planning this, right, when you're doing your party thing, one of the questions we sort of had was, you've got, people always kind of ask, okay, what's the one politician, that you want to sit down and have a beer with? That's kind of a big sort of thing. But
in the history of the world?
But I would just change the question and say non-politician, right? So what, you're Clinton, you might be president, right? You can invite anybody to the White House.
In the world or in history?
Well, right now, say anybody alive, and then, maybe historical too. Like, who would you call up and say, yeah, I really wanted to hang out with that person? Get them over.
Maybe watch the Dolphins game.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, what's happened is some of these people I've actually met over the last year. I was a huge Dan Marino fan growing up, but I've gotten to know him. I'd invite him. I'm not saying he's not cool still, but that was from the 80s and 90s. And so I think there's a couple interesting things that are happening today. I'm actually, I can't always mess up her last name, but this young lady, Malala, you've been familiar with her story. I think she's a really fascinating story, and the courage that she's taken to speak out on global issues impacting young girls. So it's someone that I've never met before. I'd love to be able to talk to her. She said, I think she's maybe 19 now, maybe, or 18. She's very young, but she's put a lot of work into 18 years of life or 19 years of life. So it's someone whose story I think is very fascinating. Someone who I've really just spoken to once in my whole life, or maybe once, and is Garry Kasparov, the former chess champion, who was also part of the political opposition in Russia and actually can't return to Russia today. So I haven't met with him, but I actually had a chance to speak to him on the phone a few days ago. And he's someone I'd like to spend some time with. I think he has a real fundamental understanding of what's happening inside of Russia and what it means for the future of geopolitically for our country, for theirs, for Europe and beyond. So those are a couple names that come to mind. Before this is over, I'll probably think of someone else too.
Feel free to throw them out there. And thinking of the Kasparov, that's interesting you brought that up, right? So I was thinking about this race politically. You've got, on the other side, you've got Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. And you have a guy who says openly, I'm a socialist. I'd like to bring socialism, or closer to socialism in the United States. But you grew up in a community where you actually had a whole bunch of people flee socialism. How do you...
Well, in fairness, they flee communism. There is social democracy,
right,
like you see in Europe,
right,
where government provides for every aspect of your life, but there's a consequence to that. They flee communism, which is beyond socialism. Obviously, it was government control of society, but also government control of politics, your life, the banning of religion, people being executed. So what they flee was more beyond, but I get your point.
Yeah, when you hear Bernie Sanders, you've been in the Senate with Bernie Sanders, when you hear him talk about this kind of stuff, do you ever want to say, look, Bernie, take him aside and say, here's the real deal.
Yeah, you know what I appreciate about Bernie? He's not trying to sugarcoat it. That's what he believes, and he's honest about it. He's not trying to say, this is just another version of free enterprise. I mean, he openly says, I don't think capitalism works. I'm a socialist. And obviously, he's gotten reelected in his state. I don't think it works for America. And my argument is, you want to live in a country like that, there's like dozens of countries around the world that are socialist. Move there. We should continue to be America, the one place on earth where anyone from anywhere can achieve anything through hard work and perseverance. But it's a debate we should have. If that's truly what he believes, and I think there are many in his party that share his view, obviously, because of the support he's garnered. That's why we're a free and open, pluralistic, democratic society where we can have debates about policies and their implications. But I don't personally have a problem with Bernie because he's being honest about what he believes in. I'd love to have that debate, and maybe he'll be the nominee, and we will.
Well, we're on the topic of foreign policy, and you mentioned Russia a few minutes ago. One question that came to mind is about Vladimir Putin. He comes up a lot in the debates and talking about how the next president will have to deal with Russia, deal with his leadership. I think it's kind of interesting because he has almost taken on this character within American politics and society. I mean, we see these crazy pictures of him, you know, hunting and riding horses, and stories about him wrestling tigers and all these crazy things. And but there's actually some really significant and scary aspects to Russia and their involvement in the world stage. So how would you deal with someone like him? Well, what would be your approach?
Well, first, by understanding 2 points. On the one hand, he is the leader of a country that between them and us possess over 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. So we're going to have to deal with him. But also deal with him understanding who he is. Vladimir Putin is basically a gangster in his activities, and he's almost virtually indistinguishable from the head of an organized crime organization in his behavior. This is a man who blew up an apartment building, ordered the blowing up of an apartment building so he could blame it on Chechens and justify a military intervention. But he's also a geopolitical actor, in essence. Unlike people like radical jihadists that are motivated by pure ideology, he's largely motivated by geopolitical calculations and tactics. So, for example, his incursion in Syria is multi-pronged. Part of it is to distract the world from Ukraine and the situation there. Part of it is domestic politics. He wants to appear as a strong international leader that has placed Russia on par with the United States in terms of geopolitical influence. Part of it is he wants to retain an era of influence in that region, and Syria obviously gives him the opportunity to do it if Assad retains power. So there's multiple aspects to this calculation. And before he takes action, he weighs the costs and the benefits. And he only proceeds usually if he believes that the benefits outweigh the costs. He most certainly did that in Georgia in 2007, 2008. He did it in Ukraine. He did it now in Syria. So as an American president, our job is to change that calculus on him, to ensure that he realizes that actually the costs are higher than the benefits of any of this activity that he might take. But you have to begin by understanding this is not someone you're going to be able to find some sort of cooperative agreement with. You're going to have to deal with him in ways that, in many ways, reflect back, unfortunately, to the Cold War and some of the Cold War leaders that governed Russia. Until such time as there's new leadership in Russia, and hopefully the Russian people will have a new and better future than what they have now under Putin.
I know we're going to jump around to a bunch of topics. I just want to mention briefly, we want to get into some young professional issues given that this is the primary audience here today. But I also want to mention to the audience that if you have a question, raise your hand so we can see it. There's mics that will be able to come up and get you on the mic so we can ask the questions. So let's get into some of the young professional issues.
And I'm going to ask that question, and I really think it's an American issue, truly, which is financing higher education. I am paying off my bachelor's degree, I'm looking at financing my master's, and my son is a sophomore in college. So I'm up to my eyeballs with all kinds of investment in my future. I've read a lot about your thoughts, and I know that you have many approaches to addressing these issues. Can you tell us about your student investment plan in particular?
Sure. Well, first let me tell you why I care so much about it, because I owed over $100,000 myself in student loans. In fact, I still owed them in 2011 on the day
Kind of write a book.
Yeah, well, exactly. And so had I not been able to do that, I'd still be paying that loan, and I think I would have been paying it well into my late 50s or early 60s. So it's not that I didn't think it was a good investment, but it was that it became, and especially early on, it was really staggering. It was over $1,000 when you added it to some of the undergrad loans that I had as well, which weren't large, but they all added up. So that's why I'm so passionate about it, and I've approached this in 3 ways, but when it comes specific to this issue, I've tried to be bipartisan about it because I don't think this needs to become a partisan issue. The first thing I've talked about, and it's a bill that I have with Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, is called income-based repayment, which is your income, your loan payments, the automatic method of repaying them will be based on how much money you make. The more you make, the faster you're going to pay off those loans. The less you make, the less of a burden it's going to be. And for me, that's a better approach than not collecting anything at all and allowing people to go into default, because a student loan debt that goes into default can never be discharged, ruins your credit, means it locks you out of home ownership, entrepreneurship, and all sorts of things. The student investment plan is an idea that actually allows individuals that instead of going to a student loan route, allows you to go to the equivalent of a private investment group, the way you would with a company. And you present to them who you are and what your background is and what your future goals are and your resume and your GPA and your transcripts. And they look at all this and they decide whether or not they think you are a good investment. And if you are a good investment, they pay for your tuition. They pay for your, this is primarily at the graduate level. And in return, you sign a contract to pay back a percentage of your income, 1 or 2% a year for 20 years or 15 years. If you become financially successful as a result of that education you received, they're going to make their money back with a profit, like they would if they invested in a company that was successful. If you decide you're going to drop out of society and move to Australia and live in a tent, they made a bad investment and they lost their money. But the risk is on the private investment group side, not on the student side. And the third is something called right to know before you go, which is also a bipartisan idea with Senator Wyden. And what it says is that before you take out a student loan, schools will be required to tell you how much people make when they graduate from that school with the degree that you are seeking. So people understand what their job prospects and earning prospects are before they borrow thousands of dollars to pursue a degree. Again, we're not going to ban philosophy majors, we're not going to ban anything, but people need, I think they will make better decisions if they have access to information that informs you about what your job prospects are in the new economy with the degree that you're seeking, and you can make a more informed decision about whether you should borrow money to pay for that degree.
So the student investment plan was a new idea I had not heard of while I was preparing for today. Everybody I shared this with had the same question that I want to pose to you. What's the difference between indentured servitude? This is what comes front in mind when I hear something about 10 years of my life being paid over to another person.
Well, a student loan is worse. You still owe the money. The difference is if you don't pay back the investment group, you have a contract and you can obviously have legal remedies for it. If you don't pay back your loan, it ruins your credit. They'll collect on you for the rest of your life. Because they're federally backed, they'll garnish your wages. They'll take it out of your tax return if necessary. So I think it's way better than the issue of whether you want a student loan. On the student investment plan, the risk is on the investment group. If you don't make enough money to pay them back in that defined period of time, they made a bad investment. In the student loan, if you borrowed $100,000, you owe about $100,000, and you will owe that $100,000 until the day you die or pay it off. And if you don't pay them, as I said, they will take your tax refund away from you. They could garnish wages because of the Federal Department of Education. They could, obviously most importantly, report you to the credit agencies and ruin your credit and the ability to buy a home or finance a business. If you just don't make enough money to pay back the student investment group, they made a bad investment. They assume that risk. There's a big difference. And by the way, it's optional. It's not mandatory. We're not telling anybody they have to pursue this route. But it is way better than owing a student loan, which there's no way you will owe that amount of money whether you found a job or not.
And that's the reality I'm in. I'm unable to start a business. I'm unable to buy a home. I am investing in my education as well as the next generation, so I really appreciate your concern.
Well, by the way, the student loan debt sits on there as your debt-income ratio as well. So when banks look at you and say, you want a mortgage, but you owe $100,000, you already have a mortgage. It's called a student loan. And they look at that, they calculate that into your income to debt ratio when making decisions about who to lend money to. So it locks people out of loans to start a business, but it locks you out of home ownership.
Well, speaking of being locked out, I mean, that is sort of the problem a lot of young people are dealing with. You had student loans, right? And then there's the cost of affording a home in a nice neighborhood to raise your kids in. It's very expensive. And there's bureaucratic obstacles to starting a business. There's regulatory obstacles to going out on your own. I mean, there's all sorts of infrastructure in place in the United States these days that are designed to sort of lock you out. There are little hurdles that you have to go. And you talk a lot about trying to break through some of that and making a more opportunity society. So when you're talking to 20, 30-somethings about those obstacles, what do you tell them?
Well, first of all, the idea that big government is good for people that are trying to make it is a myth that needs to be completely debunked. Regulations are often used by established industries to lock out an innovative new competitor. Industries use it. Why? Because you're a big company and you control the marketplace. Let's say you're the largest player in an industry. You have power. You hire lobbyists and you hire lawyers and you lobby government to put in place regulations. Why? Because you know that some small startup can't comply with those regulations. They can never enter the space and compete against you. And you see this repeated itself, for example, in the sharing economy. Whether it's on the transportation side or something else, you see established industries at the local level argue, oh, we shouldn't allow Uber or Lyft or these companies because this or that public safety. But in reality, what they're looking is to use an established regulation to protect an established industry against innovative competition. So that's the first thing I would say about regulations. The second is, I'm not an anarchist, so we do need to have, I just got off an airplane, a commercial flight. I'm glad that plane is regulated. That means someone checked to make sure the engines work, the landing gear is intact, and those pilots, by the way, are truly pilots, and not just someone that slept at a Holiday Inn Express. But the flip side of it is, if you go too far in regulations, it becomes a burden, a barrier to entry, and it makes us uncompetitive globally. So what I propose at the federal level is a federal regulatory budget. which caps the amount of money that federal regulations can cost our economy in a given fiscal year. And what that would require agencies to do is, if they want to impose a new regulation that costs $1 billion to comply with, they will have to get rid of $1 billion worth of regulatory costs to stay on the regulatory budget. That would force a cost-benefit analysis of new regulations or existing ones, but it would also limit the growth of the regulatory state, which today serves as a massive impediment to a small business or a startup entering the marketplace.
Thinking of these massive organizations that sort of suppress and keep people down, you know, Mike and I have this pretty big excitement coming up about, you know, the Empire and the new Star Wars movie that's coming out. And you would have been about 9 years old when Empire Strikes Back came out.
Yeah, the first one I was probably like 6. Like everybody else, I just got the I guess the DVD collection now.
Right.
For my kids, they're all caught up.
So first of all, when you were watching these as a kid, like, who did you identify with? What action figures did you have? And are you excited about taking your kids to the theater to see this?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I had the action figures. I think I had the Death Star, but it kept breaking, just like it did in Part 2. And Empire Strikes Back, it blew up because the guy got that rocket to go into that hole. Remember that? That was my favorite, but I think now that you see the whole story play out, I used to hate Darth Vader, now I kind of feel a little bit sorry for him. I know what he went through to get to that point. And it's probably the most fascinating character in the whole movie, because it started out as this individual with a tremendous amount of talent and promise. Then something went wrong, something really went bad, he went dark and went nasty. And so I think it's, kind of, they've done a good job. They should have started that way. They went backwards on it. So now I'm torn, do I still hate Darth Vader? I don't know.
Well, I think we're going to find out in the next movie. But the Star Wars theme, one of the themes is
Anakin, right?
So,
Anakin,
right. So you've got with Luke, you had the sort of youth and inexperience, and the whole world against him, and everybody telling him, "But you can't do that. You're too young, right?" And in your career, you've probably heard that a little. Not to make that exact comparison, but you've heard that sort of complaint, right? This guy. You're too young to be Speaker of the House, right? Too young to be a U.S. Senator. Come on, wait your turn, man. Too young to run for president. You've got a bunch of people in this room, I think Mike and myself and others included, who probably heard a little bit of that when we took on positions of responsibility. You're really ready for this. So, is that an argument that you think works these days with a generation of Gen Xers and millennials that were raised on Star Wars, Back to the Future, Harry Potter, right? Is that argument works? Do you even have to defend it these days, or you just let those people?
First of all, I'm 44, and my kids don't think that's that young. And the second point I would make is that this is a different political climate, and that's why I argue it's so different. The country is not just living through an economic downturn. This is not a cyclical thing that's happening here. We are living through a massive, rapid, and ongoing economic transformation into the very structure of the economy. This economy looks nothing like the economy of 15 years ago now. It doesn't look anything like the economy of 5 years ago. And it's not just that it looks different. The structure of the economy is different. But the pace of change is faster than ever. There's a statistic I always use. It took the telephone, which is an extraordinary invention. It took the telephone 75 years for 100 million people to use it. It took Candy Crush 1 year to reach 100 million people as users. That's how fast things are changing. One of the largest retailers in the world doesn't own stores. One of the largest transportation companies in the world doesn't own cars. One of the largest hospitality companies doesn't own hotel rooms. So this is a very different economy, and it challenges our policies. We have a retirement program designed in the 30s, an immigration and a higher education system from the 50s. We have anti-poverty programs from the 60s, energy policies from the 70s, tax policies from the 80s and 90s. And the world has dramatically changed just in the last 5 years. This is the Industrial Revolution happening every 5 years, not every 50 or 100. And so it is important for us to have leaders that understand this, that understand that you can be a conservative, but you've got to apply those principles to the issues of the 21st century, which involves global competition, rapid changes in innovation, and a need to modernize higher education. It is feasible that someone could graduate at 22 years of age with a certain skill set, and in the new economy, before you're 40, have to be retrained, because the industry that was cutting edge when you were 22 is now obsolete. We don't have a higher education system designed to deal with that sort of thing. We had a higher education system that was built by the fact that you graduated with a 4-year degree, and you did that for the next 40 years, working at one company, you retired with a pension, and you were secure. Those days are gone. First of all, you may not even be anyone's employee. You might be a contractor, have 5 different employers over that period of time. The industry that's cutting edge today is obsolete in 5 to 10 years. The skills are evolving on a regular basis, which means we have to become lifelong learners. All these sorts of things that need to be confronted. So back to your question, I think our country is in desperate need of leaders that understand not just the new economy, but what life is like in the new economy. And we have way too many people in Washington that have no idea that this is going on. They're still writing 20th century solutions for 21st century problems.
So besides Star Wars, we wanted to get to know you a little bit better about talking about some of your other personal interests and some of the things that you do as a person, what you read, where you get your news from. But I wanted to start with football. I know you're a big football guy. Unfortunately, I know you're a Dolphins fan too, and the Patriots.
Yeah, they suck.
Dolphins.
They beat us again. When is Tom Brady retiring? Is that
you had to say that because I wasn't going to bring up that little Deflategate tweet, but
what do you want? We're going to lose anyway. Give me a list.
But
You got to blame it on something.
talk about football, and you grew up playing, I understand, and it's something you're passionate about, and what does that mean to you? And do you take any lessons from that to what you do today?
Well, I love the game, of course, but the thing about the game that I really love, and my sons play as well. They're young, but they play, and I'm involved in that. I think it's a great teacher of life lessons. I think it's a sport that teaches people to work with other people. You have 11 people on a field, and if one of the 11 doesn't do their job, the other 10 pay the price. So it teaches accountability. It's a sport that forces you sometimes to do things you don't want to do that are uncomfortable. Like I played cornerback for a few years, and sometimes I had to come up and fill the run and then taking on a pulling guard, and it was painful. And my job was basically to get wiped out, but in a way that created a traffic jam so someone else could come make the tackle. I didn't want to do that, but I had to. That was my job, and I had to do it for the other 10 people I was playing with. It teaches you to deal with adversity. Especially if you're a defensive back, the best in the world are going to give up a play. You're going to give up a bad play. You're going to give up an 80-yard bomb on you because that's just the way it is. And you've got to be able to mentally come back from that and pretend like you're still the greatest player in the world in your mind, even though you just gave up a play, because the next play is going to be right there for you. You can't be wallowing on the fact that you had something go wrong. You have to deal with adversity. Losing is a great teacher. Now, you want to lose too much, but losing is a great teacher. That's why the Patriots don't know a lot, because that losing is a teacher because you learn from it as long as you channel that disappointment into concrete action. So these are lessons that I took from my time in football that I think are very difficult to replicate in other sports or without sports in your life. And so for me, that's one of the reasons why now as an adult, I try to use football to instill those lessons, not just in my kids, but in the kids I've had a chance to coach.
Well, I have to ask then too, because I think I'm a big football fan too. I'm sure there's a lot of people here too.
Patriots fan?
Yes, yeah.
Season ticket
holder. So we've had a pretty good run. But at any rate, a lot of things. I'm a parent too.
We play them again the last game of the year.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll have won so many games they'll just not play Brady. That backup dude, we'll get to him. His name Garoppolo?
Garoppolo. Yeah, I don't know. You can watch out for him. But football fans, one of the things that is a big discussion right now is the discussion about concussions. Mm-hmm. And I have a young son, and he may have an interest in football someday, and a lot of parents are now asking themselves, do they want to let their kids play because of this concern about the health impacts of it? And do you have a feeling on that too?
Yeah.
Have you looked at that issue?
Of course. And I would say, number one, if your kids don't like contact, don't force them to play. Football's not a game you're going to get better at. You either like contact or you don't. So that's the first thing. If they don't want to play, don't make them play. There's a lot of sports out there we can play. The other thing is don't specialize, which is one of the things that's happening. These kids at 9 or 10 are playing one sport year-round. I think that's not good for them either. But we're very strict about that. For example, I've never, obviously not every parent can do this because then you won't have a team, but I've never let my kids play inside the box, which means in between the tackles, I don't let them be a running back. They have to play receiver, corner, or safety, but I don't let them at this age play in the box because it's just constantly pounding. The other is good coaching. There's good coaching and then there's bad coaching. And we ensure in our coaching that our kids are taught the proper technique for tackling. We spend a lot of time doing that because if you can teach kids to get their head out of the way, use their shoulders, primarily tackle the legs, not the upper body, that avoids a lot of that repetition. The other thing that's happened too is you don't have contact during the league. So there are things you can do to minimize the risk, especially at a younger age. There is still inherent danger in any sport where people run full speed at each other, like soccer, like stunt cheerleading that my daughter did for a few years, where I saw catastrophic injuries, both knees being blown out and people being dropped. like lacrosse, and flag football, where you have people running full speed without any gear on. So I suppose we could wrap kids in bubble wrap and say, all right, nothing bad's ever going to happen to you. But in a way, I think there's a balancing act here. And we try to make football safer. There is no activity in life that's inherently risk-free, and football's one of them. And it's a great game, and I hope they don't kill it.
I want to go back to the books thing for a second. So whenever a friend of mine has a baby or one of my nieces or nephews have a birthday, books are what I like to give. And I still remember when I turned 8 years old that I got Beverly Cleary's Ramona Quimby Age 8. So just, there are books that sort of have an impact on you during your formative years. So what do you recall when you were younger?
Well, you're going to think this is not even a book, it's books. My parents, I think in 83 or 82, my Christmas present was the World Book Encyclopedia, which I don't even think exists anymore, right? And I don't know if some people here are old enough to remember what those were. And then I remember one year we lost the D book. And so if I ever need anything that started with D, I wouldn't know what it was. And so I love those encyclopedias, because even though I wasn't I was not a good student until I started paying for it in college. I always loved to read. I always read a lot. And when I wanted to learn about something, that encyclopedia, I think I read a lot of that book. Then you would get this every year they update you with a book of the year or whatever. I look back at that just as an example of how much the world has changed, right? I mean, if I wanted to learn about something when I was 9, 10, or 11 years old, I had to go to an encyclopedia or the school library. If a 9 or 10-year-old wants to learn something now, you learn about it in milliseconds by going online, virtually any topic. So that was the book that, growing up, had a lot of influence on me. I also read a lot of books about Cuban history, because my grandfather was big on that. I don't remember the names of all of them, but there's one book by Herbert Matthews. It's called Cuba. It's a really big book, and it went all the way back from Cuba's colonial days all the way through 1957, 58. So just, again, those were things I was curious about, and those books fed that curiosity.
The encyclopedia is a great lead-in for my question, which is, what part of U.S. history, if given the chance, would you rewrite? Now, slavery may be an apparent choice,
right.
So perhaps something less obvious than that.
Well, I do think that some of the factors that led to the Great Depression could have been addressed earlier, and obviously there were changes made subsequent to prevent that from ever happening in the end, so I think that's an era that people would want to revisit. I'm not sure the Civil War was avoidable if you look at the great compromises that delayed it by a number of years, but ultimately there was going to be a conflict because slavery, as you mentioned, was always an inherent and direct conflict with the Constitution. It was never compatible. And even the founders, I think, understood that eventually that institution would have to be dealt with, and it took too long to do so. Most certainly, even in the aftermath of slavery, for the first half of the 20th century, racial discrimination in America was pronounced. And it was something, my parents have a story. They came to America, they went to New York City, and they were driving down to Miami from New York City, and I don't remember the dates exactly, but their car broke down somewhere in the South. They believe it was South Carolina, I can't prove that, but it was the first chance they ever interacted with segregation, because Cuba had cultural segregation, right? Like if you weren't of Spanish ancestry and white, you couldn't join the Havana Yacht Club. Like Batista was the dictator of the country, but he couldn't be a member of the Havana Yacht Club, but it didn't have legal segregation. So for them, that was a shocking experience. They had never, and the reason why they knew about it is because when they got stopped, they asked an African-American lady about a movie that was playing, because while the car was being fixed, they were going to go watch this movie, and she said, well, I don't know, because we're not allowed in there. So it was the first time they had really interacted with that. So that's a period that I think took too long to resolve. That period from the end of slavery to the civil rights era, that just lingered way too long. It obviously never should have happened. But I think that's a period that I wish we could have, as a nation, avoided and dealt with much quicker, perhaps, never had happened.
Well, after 2008, election of Obama, race relations were supposed to get better in the United States, and I think a lot of people would look at the situation now and go, maybe they've gotten worse in a lot of ways. You've talked about this a little bit. Is there anything the President of the United States can really do, and how might you, what could be done to sort of ease tensions and maybe make things a little bit better?
So the things that manifest racism in governments are illegal now. I mean, so is there things the president can do? Certainly the president's the most important public figure in the country, and in the words you say, you can most certainly call attention to major issues. But these are societal issues that have deep pathologies that go back dozens of years and beyond. I mean, the reality of it is that there's a significant percentage of Americans, of African Americans, particularly young males, who feel discriminated against. And if they feel that way, whether you agree with it or not, if they feel that way, it's a problem. you have a significant portion of your population that feels that they're somehow being treated different than the rest of the country. And I know people that feel that way, who tell me this. And in some instances, I've actually seen it as well. And so it's an issue that the country has to confront. I think there's good news and bad news. I mean, the bad news is that it continues in many of our communities to have lingering effects, and you've seen that manifested recently. The good news is I think that the generation that my children are a part of is probably the most, this is an anecdotal example. My sons and our team is primarily African-American football team, the kids. And I remember commenting to one of the parents once, these kids don't know color. And not just because they're 9, 10, or 11 years old. It's palpably different from when I grew up. And I think part of it is because they are used to growing up in a society where there are different people of all backgrounds and ethnicities that are together at that age. So it'll be interesting to see how that manifests itself. I think it already has in people 20 or something, 30 something. Even when I was growing up, it was still a much bigger factor than it is today. So I think over time that will help in many regards. But in the short term, I believe we do need to address the reality in this country that there are millions of people who feel as if because of the color of their skin, they're followed at the mall, they're treated differently. If a significant percentage of the American family feels this way, it's an issue. We have to talk about it. I don't think the answer to it, however, is to demonize police officers, who, by and large, are incredible people. 90-some-odd% of them are incredible people. Are there bad actors in any industry? Of course there are. But I know this, if any of us tonight have a problem and we feel in danger, we're going to call 911. And a police officer is going to respond and willing to die with a bullet so that we're safe. And I think we can't forget that either, because I think it's gone too far in that direction as well.
So we're running short on time, but I know we do have a question down here front. If we can get a mic right down here.
Thank you, Senator. Thanks, Senator, for being here today. I think this conversation lends itself to some of the rhetoric that those that are leading the polls on the Republican side are going towards. So, could you speak to how your experience is different from some of the others that are, talking about building walls and having religious litmus test of who can be president of the United States, and how does your philosophy, how does your background differ from some of the others that are leading the race right now?
Well, one of the things I've always tried to do in this campaign especially is not say, vote for me because you can't possibly vote for someone else. So my comments have nothing to do with other people. Everyone's accountable for their own statements, and they can answer for those statements, and you'll make your decisions about who you want to vote for. I can tell you two things that I think are true. The first is the presidency is the most unique political office on the planet, and most certainly in the country. When you become the President of the United States, you have to bring your principles and your values. And look, I'm running as a conservative Republican. That's who I am. And if I'm elected, that's what I'm going to be. And that's what I'm going to, my principles that guide my decision making. But you're also the leader of the United States. You're also the leader of our people. And that means you have to act in the best interest of all of your people, including people that will never vote for you, including people that don't like you, including people that say horrible things about you. You are in charge of protecting the whole country and serving in the best interest of the whole country. And you have to be able to put that stuff aside. I only say that because I think divisive language from the presidency is different from divisive language by a senator or a private citizen or a congressman or a local state legislator. The divisive language from the presidency is impactful. It can actually drive and wedges in a society. And I think that's, both parties have been guilty of this. But I avoid and reject any language that says, in order for you to be better off, you have to give me the power to make someone else worse off. That the reason why you're struggling or facing problems is because someone else is doing too well and it's their fault, and let's target them. I don't think that's good for the country. I don't happen to believe that to be true. And I want to be a president that doesn't feed into that narrative. Because I actually think that what unites us as a people is so much more important and powerful than whatever might divide us on opinions on a given issue here or there. And I also want to give people, here's the way I view this campaign, and you might understand what I mean when I say this. I don't want my campaign to look back at it like a bad prom picture. You know what I mean? That prom picture where you look at it and say, man, I cannot believe that I wore that tuxedo, or I look like that, or my hair would look like that. I don't want my campaign to be something that my kids look at in 20 years and say, oh, damn, that was so embarrassing. How could you have acted that way? How could you have said these things? I want a campaign that my children are proud of. That when they look back at this time that I wasn't home, they're going to be able to say, I know he wasn't home, but he did this for a good reason. Hopefully I win, so they'll know exactly why I did it. And, but beyond it, I want a campaign that I'll always be proud of, and that the people that support me are proud of. And so whether I take a debate stage or I'm here today, I want to give people a campaign that they can be proud of. That they look at and say, this is exactly, I may not agree with him on everything, but I'm proud of what he is doing and proud of the way he held himself out. I think our country's in desperate need of that. because we do have real problems, but we also have extraordinary opportunities. There's no nation on earth I trade places with. I thank God every day that I am a 21st century American, because I think we have before us the opportunity of the greatest era in our history, but we have to act now.
I have a final question about 21st century Americans. We've been talking a lot about going back to school, higher education, and that being the future investment for our country. Your focus is on the economy, and my understanding is that high-paying jobs is an important outcome for you for higher education. Is that correct?
Correct.
I have a dear friend. She lives in a $500,000 home. She has a very high-paying job. She is unable to explain what the Florida State House is, how you got there, and more importantly, what your difference between that role and your current post is. What do we do with high-earning Americans who are uninformed voters?
Well, I mean, and one of the great things about being in a free society is people can decide for themselves what they're interested in. And so, you know, there are topics that I'm not well informed on either. You know, I don't know a lot about who's, you know, leading the standings
Is there
in
anything
Major
more
League Soccer.
fundamental in a democracy, in American
Yeah, no, I get what you're
democracy,
saying,
than voting for our elected
so
officials?
you would love for people to be more informed about some of these issues because we want more people to participate in the process. And I think part of it is, you know, as a candidate, giving people a message that pulls them in so they care more about what's happening as opposed to something that turns them off. But ultimately, I do think that there are more ways than ever to become informed. I mean, it is easier today than it's ever been to learn about what I stand for, who I am, where I came from, and what the differences are. Part of it is that. Part of it is people are really busy. I mean, if you think about the life of people today in the 21st century, again, this is nothing I read about in the book. I see it. It's my family members I'm about to talk about it. It's my friends. You get up in the morning, it's 6:30, you got to get your kids ready for school, you drop them off by 8 o'clock, then you got to go work. Then when you're done with work, you got to rush over and get to aftercare before it closes, because it closes at 6. After 6, they start charging you extra fees. Then you got to hurry home, make sure there's food to eat, and they got a ton of homework.
You're talking about a single mom.
Well,
This is,
but then you know, the backpack weighs so much. You know, just to come home, all this homework that they give them, they have to do, and then you got to make sure they're in bed. And then it's like 10 o'clock, and you're exhausted. You got to do it again tomorrow, and then the day after that. And then you talk about the situation you've described. You know, in this country, 35 out of 50 states, child care is more expensive than college. Child care is more expensive than college in 35 out of 50 American states. So how do you deal with that? That's a cost that people didn't have 25, 30 years ago. So all of that weighs on people. And when you're done with all this, you're not in the mood for politics or a debate on CNBC. You're kind of tired, and you got to go back tomorrow and do it all again. And that's if you can even go to sleep at 10 o'clock, because you might have brought home work with you that you got to do. So I understand that people are facing extraordinary strains on daily life, because in so many ways life has become so busy in comparison to what it once was. And work doesn't, and technology means work doesn't leave us when we leave the office. It follows us wherever we are, 7 days a week.
So unfortunately, we're running up against time here. We're going to wrap up. I'm going to throw it over to Kate to ask the final question. Real quick, lightning round though. One of the things we wanted to ask about is bucket list items aside from being
That I've never done. Places I've never
a
been.
couple things. What are you doing? What do you want to do? This may take 8 years to get there if you're successful, but what are some of the things that you
Well,
want to
one
share
of the
with
things
this
I've
country?
always want to do eventually is I want to be able to visit a free Cuba. Not a Cuba under the control of the Castro brothers, but a free Cuba, and actually walk the streets where my parents grew up and visit the cemetery where my grandparents are buried, and my father's parents are buried, my mother's buried. Visit the farm where my grandfather grew up that I heard so much about as a child. This is something I most definitely want to be able to do at some point. I haven't spent a tremendous amount of time in Asia. I've been to Japan, I've been to South Korea, I've been to the Philippines, but it's a region of the world that I'd love to be able to learn more about, because I think so much of the 21st century is going to happen in the Asia-Pacific region because of just economic growth that's going to happen there. I did go to Petra about 2 years ago, so that was one of the items, so I got to check that off. I've been to a Super Bowl, so one of my bucket items is to go to a Super Bowl.
Super Bowl?
The Patriots playing the Eagles, yes, and they won. But one of my bucket items is to like go to a Super Bowl where the Dolphins are like playing in it. So
Might take a while.
It might take a while, yeah, thank you. Well, they got lucky, but Tom Brady was sitting on the bench. Okay? They didn't even know he was that good until they put him in 2002. I learned him. Anyway, there's probably another Tom Brady out there one day for us. But these are ideas, things that I'd love to be able to do. Great.
All right, so final question. So today's theme was life of the party. So you have a chance now to connect with the 20 and 30-somethings in this room. So to close today, what toast would you give to our party on your journey ahead, things that we should think about?
That I think we have the opportunity to be the freest and most prosperous Americans that have ever lived. I really think the 21st century has been tailor-made for us, as a nation and as a people. we've got to do some things to make that happen. If we do what needs to be done, the 21st century is going to be the greatest era in the history of this great country. There are going to be millions of people around the world that can afford to buy, trade, and sell things with you. And the 21st century is going to be extraordinary. If we fail to do what needs to be done, we're going to be the first Americans ever that inherit a diminished country and leave our children worse off than ourselves. We're at a generational moment in our nation's history, and we must choose what kind of country we're going to be in the 21st century. And if we do what needs to be done, it'll be greater than it's ever been.
Well, with that, we're out of time,
It's a long toast,
unfortunately.
I know.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.
On behalf of the panel, I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank Bank of America again for their support in making this possible. We want to thank Stay Work Play and New Hampshire Institute of Politics here at Stanton College for being our host. And most importantly, we want to thank you, Senator, for joining us today and doing this with us. Thanks very much. Copy of the continuing of today's program will be available on the Stay Work Play website, and we look forward to seeing you at another one soon.